one of the first things that I've seen, one of the first many mistakes I've seen over and over again in track and field is the proper sprint mechanics. And I call this the sprinter's box. And what happens within the sprinter's box is an athlete is running and they're cycling. But what I've seen time and time again, one of the common mistakes is an athlete running and they're extending their lower leg outside of the knee. So they're just running like they're marching. That's something that we want to prevent. The reason why we want to prevent that is because you're going to open this athlete up to being more susceptible to injuring the hamstring. When you're sprinting, you're falling and recovering. So you're just landing with a flat angle and you're pushing off the opposite foot. It's called the sprinter's box because you want the shin to stay inside of the knee. What does that mean? Sir Isaac Newton, he told us for every action there's an equal opposite reaction. And when we're sprinting, the objective is to run most efficiently and harmoniously as possible. So if you're running and your athlete is pausing and they're running, that's not a harmonious action. You want it to be a continuous and fluid action. We also understand that for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. So the more force that you apply downwards is going to give you double that energy in return. How many of us say that time and time again? We're coaching. All the time. Get the knees up. Mm-hmm. But how do we accomplish that? How do you accomplish that? So, Coach, why don't you come up here? You're going to be my demonstrator since you're a fellow jumper. All right, we're going to stand in place. We're just going to stand here and just get the knees up. Get them up. Get them up. Get them up. Get them up. All right. Yeah, just keep getting it up. Yeah. You got those knees up, right? Yes. Okay. So next what I want you to do is I want you to do the same exact thing, but I want you to use the ground and drive the knee. Okay. Stop. Now which one of those was easier for you? Both. Huh? Both. Both was easier? Yeah, so which one was easier? So this one was easier than this one. Which one was easier? Hitting the ground. Okay. The reason why, what I'm trying to get you to understand is the knee lift doesn't come from the hip flexor. It comes from the force that you apply downwards. So for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. So the energy that you drive down into the ground, that's going to allow the knees to come up. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we tell the athletes to lift the knees and they fail to apply the adequate amount of force into the ground. Okay? So I want you to think about that. It's very basic, but it works. Secondly, we tell our athletes, in particular the football players and some of the coaches that may not, really have a great understanding of force application, is get up on those toes when you run. How many of you said that? Get on your toes. Okay. So I just want you to just sit here. Just get up high on those toes. And I just want you to squat, just squat. Oh man. Yeah. Okay. Try to stay balanced. Just try to stay nice and balanced as possible. Okay? Now I just want you to get flatter. I want you to land flatter. I just want you to just squat down. Squat down. Okay, why are you not doing the little in between thing? Okay, I was just joking. All right. Which one was easier?
Squats.
On your toes or landing flat?
Landing flat.
Landing flat, yeah. Landing flat because you're able to apply more force. Yeah. It's equivalent to you squatting. So when you're squatting, you're landing flat. You're not high up on your toes because you can't generate force that way. You can't generate force on your toes. So you get in a flatter angle, you're able to apply the adequate force to move the weight low. The same concept is applicable when you're sprinting. You don't want to land really high up on your toes. You want to land on a flatter angle. You should have a credit card. You should be able to slide underneath the heel. That's going to allow you to generate the necessary force to propel yourself horizontal, which is the objective, to maintain horizontal velocity. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay? And the next concept is, I want you to think about is keeping the legs in motion. Your legs should continuously move. You should never see a pause in your running style, in your running form. Because, Sir Isaac Newton said, a body in motion stays in motion. A body at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by external force. So I want you to think about when your athletes are running, you want to think about A, keeping the legs inside the box. 2, continuously applying force downward. And which is going to bring me to the next point of the arm stroke. The arm stroke is very, very important in the overall mechanics of teaching the athlete. So we don't want to run and get stuck running at 90 degrees the whole time. You don't want the arms moving at 90 degrees the entire time. And I've seen that over some common mistakes on a high school level, even on the collegiate level, where the athlete is just running and the arms are just 90 degrees the entire time. So I want you to imagine your forearm here, if you will. This is your hammer. This is your hammer. What you're doing when you're running or sprinting, you're going to take this part of your forearm, you're going to hammer it down. So it's going to start off at 90. You're going to hammer it down. So by the time the wrist gets by the hip, you should be at about 120 degrees. You're going to hammer it down, and then it's going to create a stretch reflex, which is going to propel that arm forward. So you're just hammering the arms down. You don't want to run here. You see how long that lever is? It's slow. But if I go here and I open it up, I can continuously swing the arms. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's another tool that you can use that's not very complex. It's a relatively easy concept to teach. And how you apply that, maybe after training, you can just have the athletes just sit down, one foot in front of the other. And you just swing the arms maybe 5 to 10 times, 20 seconds. Well, actually 10 seconds, because you'll be surprised how arduous of a movement this is when you're doing it for 20 seconds, and you have to repeat that 10 times. So I'll say 5 to 10 times, 10 seconds. It'll teach that athlete how to become more competent in swinging the arms. One of the third and final common mistakes that I've seen in an athlete in terms of sprint is position. We know that we have the runners that are leaners, that have a tremendous amount of back kick, and we know we have the ones that lean back and run. So the objective is to create balance and symmetry. You want them to be able to cycle in a cycler motion as if they're riding a bicycle. You want them to stroke their arms properly, but it's difficult to accomplish those two if the athlete has this pronounced lean when they're running. So if an athlete has this lean, issue that I had when I was in high school, it took me 10 years to solve this problem. And it was a matter of perspective. When the coach told me, I want you to lean back a little bit, I was like, Coach, I feel like I'm leaning back, but it felt like, me changing the angle from here to here, it felt like I was leaning all the way back here. So he put me in the right position, because a power position, just by telling me to over-exaggerate the lean from forward to backwards. Because your body is not going to allow you to move too far from your natural running form. So progressively, you have to tell them, move back a little further, and before you know it, with repetition, you'll put them in the optimal sprint position. For those athletes that lean backwards, the same thing. You have to tell them to over-exaggerate and to give a forward lean. Now, those athletes, they may lean back with the shoulders, but the moment you tell them to lean forward, they're going to feel like they're leaning so far over. But when you show them the film, they'll be able to identify, wow. So I think one of the most important aspects is giving that biofeedback, recording each session, and showing them, because every athlete learns differently. Some you can articulate it, some you have to show them, and even some in the jumping categories, they like to hear the rhythm, so I have to clap it out.
How would you differentiate that? We always talk about the drive phase, and you stay low when you come out of the block, and they kind of either do that the whole time, or they don't do it at all and they shoot up. So I'm trying to tell them to sit up, but also want them to stay low at the beginning when they come out of the block. How would you stop from confusing them? Because they can only focus on one thing at a time.
Yes. All right, so you have to break it down into
Yeah.
different categories. You have the push or the drive phase. The drive phase is the area where they're pushing and they're driving the force backwards. During that phase is going to be the only time where their legs are really landing in front of their center mass because they're trying to counter-rotate the swing arms. So the first phase, the drive phase, and after that drive phase, it's going to be a 4 to 6 step transition phase. During that phase, you don't want them to abruptly pull their shoulders back, which is a typical mistake as well. You want them to just allow their body to come up naturally because gravity is going to pull them up naturally. And after that, we tell them, don't focus on throwing your head back. All you're doing when you're driving out, you drive, push, gravity's pulling you back. The only thing you're going to do in that transition phase is adjust your eyes. So you're not here to there, you're just running, your body's pulling itself up, and before you know it, you just adjust the eyes. And that's going to ensure that that athlete, their shoulders are moving toward the finish line and not the starting line. So that's what we look for. Okay. Let's see right here. The arm action. So I'll start off with identifying an approach. I typically don't like to do it on the long jump runway. I would prefer to do it on the actual track. You'll take a series of 6 approaches, and you'll take the cluster and take the average of those jumps. What we're looking for in the long jump, you don't want to see the athlete take off as fast as they can, because the objective is for the athlete to reach their maximum speed, not at the board, but all the way through the board. And that same concept applies in the 100 meters as well. We know that they're going to hit their maximum velocity for high school students somewhere between 35 and 40 meters. So you want them to be able to set the acceleration up properly. And what does that mean? We don't want to hear, I give you an audio. You don't want to hear the athletes do this out of the blocks or in the first phases of the longer triple jump. You don't want to hear this. You don't want to hear that. You want to hear, it starts off with really long, powerful strokes and levers. And then as you progress, the frequency and the cadence, it increases. So each step should be faster than the previous step maybe. So it should sound more like. And I think if you articulate it to the athletes, you give them audio of what the expectations are, they'll be able to execute that. So I tell them the analogy of it's like an airplane taking off. The airplane just doesn't hit 178 miles per hour. It takes, it gradually builds, it builds, it builds, it builds. It's continuously building momentum. And when it hits top speed, it takes off. So that same concept, again, is applicable in the long jump, triple jump, and sprinting, and setting up the proper acceleration phase. So for the beginners, jumpers, it can vary based on the level of athleticism, based on the experience, based on how long they've been performing in the track, based on their sprinting potential, strength potential. All those variables are very important. So it can range anywhere from 8 steps upwards to 18 steps. You know, so you have to use your discretion to determine how far that approach. But the most important factor you have to take into consideration is you want them to be at their peak speed through the board. So some of the push phase drills that I like to do in setting up that acceleration is running hills. You can have them run short hills. You can have them pull the sled for about 40 meters. That will help them spend a little bit more time on the ground, because in this push phase, you're spending just a little bit more time on the ground because you haven't reached peak speed and you haven't reach your maximum velocity yet. So you're going to spend a little bit more time on the ground. You're going to progressively build momentum. Each step should be faster than the previous step in the long jump until you run through the board and reach your maximum velocity. In the 100 meters, you're going to build momentum. You're going to progressively get faster. Then it's going to become a point where the speed plateaus, and now it's about maintaining that cadence all the way through the finish line. But the hills and the sleds are two valuable tools that I've used to help with push phase. Okay, so this the second half of the long jump, triple jump approach is the frequency drills. The frequency is when the athletes are swinging their arms as volatile as possible. They're driving their legs downwards as fast as possible, and it's about frequency and high cadence. You want to maintain that cadence as long as you possibly can. So the momentum that you use from the push phase, it should carry you to a seamless transition. Then you focus on the frequency phase, and you should be able to maintain that cadence all the way through. Now, in terms of how do you maintain that frequency, conditioning is going to be an important factor. So they have to be well conditioned in order to reach that phase. Some of the drills that we do for the frequency, if y'all seen those belts, the rocket release belts, you can have the athletes, you can resist them, you can move their arms, driving the legs down as fast as possible, and then you release that contraption, and then they just take off. I think that's a good tool. Running downhill is another great tool for teaching frequency, but you don't want to do it at the expense of senior athletes doing it and have horrible sprint mechanics. Again, you want to make sure at all times that the shin is never leaving the knee. You should never see that when you're running. Okay? You should drive the knee, lead with the knee, knees up, and you drive it right back down. You know. Okay, so whenever a tool that I've really used to help offset some of those issues is the mini hurdles. And you can set them up apart about 6.5 feet apart, and you just have the athletes run over those hurdles. I prefer to put those hurdles out about 40 meters because it teaches good habits without you having to continuously say, hey, get your knees up. Hey, drive your foot down. Hey, make sure you're running inside of the box. It's a valuable tool that I think is a best practice that now people all over the world are using those hurdle wickets as a tool to teach kids the proper mechanics from the lower extremities. So I encourage everybody to buy those. Downhill running, again, it's important. You can have your athletes running in a stationary position, just high knees, with the emphasis of not lifting the knees up, but driving the legs downward. The more they become efficient in driving the force down, it's going to help you teach, and they'll be able to become unconsciously competent, because many of them, they start off just unconsciously incompetent because they don't know, because they've never experienced or know how to run. It's our responsibility to at least bring a level of consciousness so that they are consciously competent. So they know what they're doing, but they still have to think. They have to think about it every day. But if we give them the necessary repetition and we're constantly giving them the right drills, they'll become unconsciously competent. It'll just be automatic just as a result of repetition. So that's what we ideally want. Some athletes, it's going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more paying attention to detail than others, but overall, repetition and repetition, repetition. Any questions so far? All right, so in the jumps, you have a coaching tool called a check mark. It's the midpoint, which is the last 4 strides of the actual long jump approach. If an athlete is a right foot jumper, and let's say they're a 13-second sprinter, you could put a check mark that's specifically only for the coach. And you put that check mark 4 strides out. So if they're a right foot jumper and they land on that check mark, it should be very consistent with where they land on the board. So for example, if they're 1 foot behind that check mark and then they reach the board and they're 1 foot behind the board, you can tell that athlete to move up a foot. And in contrast, if an athlete is 1 foot over it, and you see on the check mark, they're 1 foot over, you can tell them to move back 1 foot. One of the common mistakes that I've seen athletes, the reason why they may foul over and over again is a result of them running outside of the box, meaning that shin is leaving the knee. So one of the common mistakes that I see at track meets and is quite hilarious to me. When the athlete is running here, then they reach the board and they foul by a foot, and the coach say, move back a foot. The athlete is still running outside the box, they reach the board, over by a foot. Move back another foot. The athlete is running outside the box, again he reached the board, he's over a foot. Okay? Whenever you're reaching when you're running, you're always going to put yourself in a vulnerable position to foul because you're not able to react to the ground. You're using the hamstring as opposed to pushing, you're using the quadricep. So when you're running and landing under your center mass and you plant, you're less likely to foul. But whenever you're in a position where you're running outside the box, you're probably going to consistently foul over and over. So if you use these check marks as a coaching tool, it'll help you out tremendously. I had an athlete, he goes to St. Pius. When I got him, he jumped 21 feet in the long jump. He still was a really big reacher, and I'm still working on it. It was a work in progress. But by the time we got to the state meet, this kid went from a 21 foot to becoming a state champion at 24'2", and earning himself a scholarship to go to the University of North Carolina. So, and that's just as a result of just teaching the proper swing mechanics. Teaching those kids how to stay inside the box, how to stroke their arms, and how to pay attention to the detail of body position. So the takeoff for the long jump or the triple jump, the speed that you generate, the push, the frequency is going to determine a parabolic curve. It's going to determine how far they land in the pit. So it's important to teach the athletes to gradually accelerate and to run through the board. If the athlete doesn't reach their peak speed through the board, or they begin to decelerate before the board, they're not going to be able to optimize their overall jump. So you want to always encourage the athletes to gradually accelerate, to continuously build momentum with the objective of reaching their peak speed, not at the board, but all the way through the board. If you reach your peak speed all the way through the board, you put yourself in a position where you won't just go really high up and come down. I'm quite sure we've seen the athletes, they just land really high. We tell the athlete to jump as high as you can, but in the long and triple jump, the objective is not about how high you jump, it's about how far you can move horizontally. That's why it's called the long jump. Okay? So take that into consideration as well. So upon takeoff, you want them to drive horizontally. Now, if they're running properly, they set up the jump right, they're still going to get high. Later on in the progression, it's not going to be take off up and down. It's going to take off, they're going to hit the apex of their jump later, and they're going to fall. Okay? Oh, and then finally, some of the running techniques that I like to use, like standing long jumps. You want to put them in a position where they can use their lower extremities, in particular the lower abdominals. So by doing standing long jumps, it forces them to get their legs from behind their center mass to in front of the center mass, and they have to hold and extend. And you can have them do those like 4 to 10 times, per jump session, and that will prepare them and develop those muscles. If you overload it, sometimes the kids, they can strain those pubis symphysis muscles down there. We don't want that. So I would say 10 reps maximum. during the jump sessions, you can have them do standing tuck jumps, where they're just continuously standing and bringing their knees to the chest. I would do some for you, but I'm afraid I might rupture the other Achilles, and we don't want that to happen today. So just standing tuck jumps. It's very difficult, and maybe the athletes, many of them won't be able to do it. So you just want them to stand in place, you get the knees up as high as they can, and then over the course of the season, the more they do it, the more competent they'll become and coordinated, and they'll be able to bring their knees up higher and higher and higher. So do a lot of lower abdominal, try to do V-sits. That helps with putting the athletes in the optimal landing position and developing the lower abdominal region. If you can,
Dwight, on that, when they're doing those, are we teaching them the same thing that you had started with? Force down gives you your force up, or are you trying to go light on your feet and force you to use your muscles to pull your knees up to your chest?
so when you're doing the standing tuck jumps, if you want to drive the force down, but more importantly, you want to drive the knees up, because that's going to be the same position that you're going to be using when you're in the air. And the higher they can get in the air, the more time they'll have the body to develop to bring the knees up higher. Because when you're in the air, you don't have an external force to apply force on. You're just in the air. You're an object moving in the air. That's why it's so important to drive those knees up as high as possible. And these are some of the drills that, we can use on any level, the age group level, the high school level, or collegiate or professional ranks. These are pretty consistent jumping drills that we use. Additionally, if you can have a small box, maybe about 4 inches high, I build them Home Depot. I build like 10 of them just as a coaching tool, and you can have the athletes take off from that box, and that'll give them more time to go through their progressions in the air, which will serve as a drill to help develop their landing technique. So these are some of the drills that I like to encourage or reinforce. These are some of the photos I've taken too. So last but not least, a rule of thumb, you don't want to jump every day of the week. In particular, not on the high school level, not on the professional, the age group. You just don't want to jump every day of the week. I would encourage you to maximum 2 times a week jumping. Especially in the triple jump, because you're putting a tremendous amount of stress and force on your lower extremities, and they may not have the strength potential to be able to handle that amount of volume. So you have to be very conscious of the amount of jumps that they take throughout the week. Otherwise, the athletes are going to be very susceptible to injuring themselves. So I would prefer on a Monday, for example, we would do 6-time approaches, and we would do some little easy bounding on the grass, maybe 4 times 60 meters. On Tuesday, you do more of a sprint type of endurance, and I like to do a series of small hops. It prepares the athlete to be able to absorb the shock of taking off. So one of them is just small hops, because when you're sprinting, you're never leaving, the shank of your legs is never going down low. So just by us doing this right here, it's a very difficult exercise. You can have to do that 10 times, 4 times 10 meters. I wouldn't exceed 10 meters. You get athletes, for the triple jump, you scale it based upon their level of competence. So you can have them do a 4-step triple jump week 1, and when you see they're making progress and they can handle more speed, you take them back 6 steps, 8 steps, 10 steps. But never, ever, ever will I encourage you to jump an athlete at practice from a full approach. Never. Never. That's what you have to.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, so you can do box bounds. Again, you can build those boxes about 3 inches, 5 inches off the ground, and you can build about 5 of them, and you spread them apart, and you just get them used to landing on the grass, landing on the box, because now they're falling from a higher falling position, It's preparing them to learn how to absorb and attack the ground. So these are some drills that we use not only for jumpers, but for sprinters to develop power and explosiveness.
You said that box size is,
It's a
I know it's
four.
the length of.
Yeah. The height, I mean, I would say 5-6 inches, no higher than that. It's a really good tool, and it teaches, it has so many different applications you can use it for. You can use it for bounding, you use it to develop explosiveness, and these have been some really beneficial tools that I've used throughout the years of my young coaching experience. But I've had a lot of success from transitioning an athlete from that beginning stage to the intermediate to the point they've become unconsciously competent. Any questions? Well, that'll conclude.
I have one for you.
Okay.
So, the front side and, sprint mechanics, if you extend that into endurance events, I assume it still has some relevance. So would you encourage coaches, especially at the younger end of high school, to maybe do a couple of sprint workouts with the sprint group?
Yeah, so you're saying middle distance runners? Yes, I definitely like to encourage even middle distance runners because the objective is to run as efficiently as possible. And if you would put yourself in a position to run more efficiently, it doesn't matter if you're running 100 meters or 10,000 meters. If you can run at the right angle, and traditionally most middle distance runners are not going to have a problem of running on their toes for a 5 or 10K or a marathon. They're going to land quite naturally with a flatter angle because you'll be able to maintain that cadence for extended periods of time. But in terms of the front side mechanics, I think that's very important. The premier middle distance runners, look at Rich. This guy, he didn't see a lot of back kick on that run because it didn't put him in an optimal position to continue to build momentum and to carry that cadence throughout 800 meters because 800 meters is a sprint. Nowadays, the world record is 140. So you have to keep the body in motion. You have to stay inside the box. You have to have the proper sprint mechanics. And I would say at least twice a week, you do teach your middle distance runners. You can put them over the same hurdle wickets to teach the proper sprint mechanics. Any other questions? That was a great question about it. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.